Welcome back to Seed to Harvest, a podcast with founders, creators, and investors about their stories, frameworks, and tactics. Today, I'm joined by NEA partner Ann Bordetsky, and thanks so much for coming on today. I love the jazz hands.
You have to give the jazz hands
You
for
have
your own
to.
introduction. You just have to. I mean, it's how we go.
It's a
Anyway, I'm super
requirement.
happy to be here, Paige, and it's awesome to see you again. I'm a huge fan of yours, so
Oh,
thanks for having me on.
of course. I'm super excited to get to reconnect with you. And then for a bit more context for those of you listening, Anne has helped build some of Silicon Valley's most iconic technology companies, such as Rival Inc., which was acquired by Ticketmaster in 2020, and has served in operator roles at Uber, Twitter, and several mobility startups. She's also been an active angel investor in many female founders. So yeah, Anne, welcome to the show. I think,
Thanks.
yeah, we were chatting a bit before the show, but I would love to talk a bit about, it's been a very fast and furious year in 2022, but also a big reset in terms of how founders are thinking about building companies. So I would love to start with kind of some of the key lessons that you've either learned directly or through the founders that you backed at NEA or in your angel portfolio throughout this year. And then we can dig a bit into your thoughts on 2023 as well.
Yeah. I mean, 2022, big year. Sometimes when I step back, honestly, I have so much empathy for founders and what they've gone through over the last couple of years because I think sort of big picture, we've been living kind of like crisis to crisis to crisis to crisis for a couple of years now. And I think like everyone has their personal life experience with that. But at a macro level, between the pandemic, between sort of, the tech hype and boom and froth of the market over the last 2 years now coming out of the pandemic, again, changing behavior. Ukraine war, energy crisis, entering a recession, trying to tame down inflation. Like, I think one of the big lessons of 2022 is we in the startup world are in no way immune to the macroeconomic forces that are playing out globally, right? I think we went through a period of time where, um, we were just focused on building, right? Like if we just built the right product and if we just built the right company, if we had the right idea, kind of, we weren't really worried about the macro so much. And I think 2022 is just bringing home for all of us, founders, CEOs, investors, operators, how much we have to sort of, be resilient in the face of these unexpected crises in the world, but also how they're shaping the global economy. Right. And, I think that there's a lot of conversations happening right now, around the table, in VC partnerships, and I imagine in boardrooms between, boards and CEOs around just how different next year and the next couple of years are going to be. And there's almost no exception to that in terms of industry or stage, right? Like everyone's going to be impacted. So I would say the big lessons and things that I'm personally thinking about as an investor is one, um, the good times are kind of over in terms of easy access to capital, right? And so that means, we're no longer sort of looking at funding momentum or just a big vision and kind of, and we're really looking for founders and companies that have viable businesses that are really, really working or have a path to really working in terms of being cash flow positive, profitable companies. And so it's kind of this giant pendulum swing from like, let's just fund whatever's hot and like, and hope it kind of works out and nobody wants to be left out to now everyone getting situated again in a very rigorous, disciplined and kind of fundamentals driven assessment of what products can work, what businesses can work, and what industries are going to be a good place for investments over the next couple of years, given that there might be, a recession, right? That's sort of hovering over all of us here. So big lesson around sort of back to fundamentals, back to efficient growth, back to building profitable companies and having a vision for how to do that. I think the other big lesson of 2022 is sort of, companies that tend to sort of endure during this time, so thrive and hopefully ultimately survive, are ones that make changes, early in order to course correct and to adjust to this new environment, right? And so The companies that leaned in and made some tough decisions 6 months ago and 12 months ago to, run leaner, cut costs, make efforts to retain their top customers, maybe focus and do fewer things well, like they're going to do very well during this period, right? And I think the companies that were like probably, had raised a lot during the last couple of years and didn't have to worry to go back to market either this year or early next year, probably have been deprived of some of that discipline and will be catching up and having to make harder adjustments to course correct next year. So you do get rewarded for acting fast and making tough calls early. And I think like the third big lesson from 2022 is you don't get to pick the timing and the
Yep.
macro environment that you're in as a founder. And as an investor, you really don't. You think one thing and then it changes, right? And so resilience in being willing to reset your own expectations and your own assumptions about what is happening around you is really, really important, right? So having that self-awareness, that curiosity, that ability to learn and adjust on the fly and say like, yeah, you know, I wish I wasn't in a tough market now, but this is my new reality. How am I going to win with these conditions in place? And just be having the courage to kind of
Yeah.
not wish for something different, but lean in and really figure out a new way to win with the circumstances as they are. And like, I think it's been kind of a mixed year, right? A lot of amazing companies got started, but it's been a very uncertain and difficult environment for a lot of startups to navigate. And I think as investors, the truth is we've probably struggled to provide the clarity that founders are looking for because we are also figuring out what the next 6, 9, 12, 24 months looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the questions that I had for you before the show, as we look back at this year, what are some of the reflection questions that you're recommending that your portfolio founders are looking at going into this new year in terms of what worked and what didn't? Are there specific ones that have been sticking out to you?
That's such a good question. Okay, I have a couple questions to recommend. I think some of them are fairly obvious, and I think some of them are more reflective and like the thing you do, when you go off for the holidays and you have a couple days of downtime and you got to go into like deep thought mode.
Yeah.
One is what are the metrics that truly matter? Right? So going back to the drawing board on strategy and asking about, what is our differentiation in the market? What is our winning play? What is our wedge product? Like really getting more crisp and clear on what is the winning product that we're going to market with. And what are the metrics that matter that give us very strong confidence that we have product market fit for that product or that we have efficient growth in how we're bringing that product to market. And,
Mm.
in almost every case, there were too many metrics, right? And too many goals and maybe two different projects that were on the roadmap. And so it's really a
Right.
question around like focus on what are the few things that matter that are going to make or break the company in the next year and make sure that that's reflected in the goals that you're communicating to your own team and to the board and, to your investors, et cetera. So I think it's, what are the metrics that matter and aligning the company to, I think that another key question is how can you grow more efficiently? Um,
Mm-hmm.
you can't stagnate because fundraising gets harder, right? You have to find a way to
Right.
continue to grow, assuming the product is working in the first place. So, going back to the drawing board on low CAC, efficient kind of go to market motions, what does that look like in 2023 with the channels that are available to you? And just kind
Mm-hmm.
of almost challenging yourself. This is how we did it last year, but how can we do it twice as efficiently, right? In 2023.
Yeah.
The more,
Wait, I
yeah.
guess I'm curious. I have a quick question. Like, as an operator, had you been through times like this in the past on the other side of the table? And kind of like, how was that experience for you?
I have actually. I have. I mean, especially the startups that I joined earlier in my career post business school,
Yeah.
that was in the 2008, 9, 10, 11
Mhm.
period. That was not a great
Yeah.
time, right, in the economy.
Yeah.
It
How
was
is,
extraordinarily hard to fundraise. It was hard
yeah.
for companies to survive and thrive, right? And it required a tremendous amount of discipline. And the reason that I encourage founders to ask that question is my hunch is, and I do think this is true sort of on average, is, a lot of startups forced to be as disciplined as they needed to be
Mhm.
because there was so much capital available in the ecosystem. And so what you find in startups is the more constraints you have, the more creative and lean and efficient
Mm,
you will be in executing
I
that,
love that.
right? And so
Yeah.
right now is a time when a lot of constraints are getting imposed again, right? But that doesn't mean you can't hit your goals, right? Hence the questions around like move the metrics that matter, scale efficiently, and find a way to still hit your goals, but maybe with less people and less marketing spend than you would have done in
Mhm.
years past.
Yeah, I love that theory of creative constraints. I've like talked a lot about this on my podcast, but I feel like that's like what makes the really interesting story is just like you being like, I don't know, for example, in college, it would be like, all right, I have like $1,000. I'm planning like a 400-person fashion show. And like, how do I get people from the community to contribute? And how do I do this within budget? And like, that's like a smaller example, but I feel like yeah, I was so much more creative with my solutions because I had to be. And then people were like, "Oh, how did you think of that?" And I was like, "Well, I had $1,000 to put budget, so like I had to be." And
Well,
I
and
think
there's
like
this
another
like cycle that we've been in where if you raise more than you need, you hire more than
yeah,
you need. And the more people you have doesn't mean you move faster as a company. Most of the time, the more people you hire, the slower you start to move because there's just a
yeah,
coordination problem that you run into at a certain size. So the thing that I've seen a couple of companies go through and have that like aha moment is they pared back their teams. They managed out maybe lower performing team members, right? So they actually have a smaller team today and they are shipping product and executing faster than they ever have before because they're leaner, they're more focused. And I think on some level, there's just this urgency of like, oh no, we got to figure out
yeah.
how
You
to
got to make this work,
like, there's
like
no
right
room for
now.
error anymore, right? And I think that that is actually driving a lot of companies to execute better today and in the last 6 months than they were with more resources and with more people, again, in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I like that phrase of like less margin for error. I think it's definitely. I want to go back to creative constraints. One of the books that you recommended founders
Mm.
read is Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard, who I think is like one of the masters of creative constraints in his creation of Chouinard, which later I think got bought by Patagonia. Is that right?
He's the founder of Patagonia.
Yeah, he's the
Yeah.
founder of Patagonia. That's right. But it started as like Chouinard was like the original name of the company. What are other books that you would recommend founders read that help them think outside the box? I think that's a really great example of one.
Mhm. Well, at first, I want to tell you why I think that book is really special, just for a little bit of context. And I do recommend,
Yeah.
like, anyone in the business world or in the startup world read it because even though Patagonia is not a startup, never took private capital, never raised venture capital, never took private equity capital. It's essentially a family run business. But it is a beautiful and marvelously successful example of someone who built a values driven company, built incredible products that people wanted, did it in a very, very scrappy way, right? And ultimately created so much value that they could actually, whether or not to take on outside capital. And Patagonia never chose to do that. And one of the reasons for that is they wanted to maintain control and they wanted to stay aligned with their, environmental ethos. And that gave them a lot of freedom. And so I think it's just an interesting counterexample to everything that we see and read about in the startup world, right?
Yeah.
You got to raise your pre-seed and then your seed. You got to become a unicorn and then a decacorn. Like, yes, that is a path you can take for building a company, but there are other paths and you should study those as well so that you know which path is the right one for you. Then the other book I absolutely love is Shoe Dog
Oh
by
my
Phil
gosh.
Knight. I read this years ago now, like years ago now, but what an amazing example of, again, scrappy company building. Like literally, you don't have enough money to make it to the next day. You have to figure out, how to get working capital and, pay for inventory, et cetera. And it's such a beautiful story of how he built this iconic brand and, from the ground up with many points at which, he thought he was going to fail and the whole thing was going to have to be shut down. And yet he made it. And it
Mhm.
reminds me a little bit of another, this is definitely not this is in a, direct lane of startups. So not a great answer to your question, but I think it reminds me a lot of, the hard things about Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, which is a classic, and everyone should pick up and like read again before
Mhm.
2023 because the themes will resonate of those kind of near death moments that, every company goes through and, having the fortitude and the creativity to navigate that in the moment. Cause I think, a lot of founders will face that next year. Let's see, other creative, I think The Originals by Adam Grant is a good one.
Ooh.
Again,
Mhm.
read this one years ago, but, he kind of makes the point that people who really truly change the world and do something that we remember, don't think like everyone else, right? They're not conformists. And I think, that's what founders really are, right? And in some ways, we do expect founders to conform, right? There's a certain pattern matching that happens in venture. But if you really study the history of like very successful companies and the founders and CEOs that led them throughout, whether it's, Uber or Facebook or, Snowflake or, there's lots of other examples, right? Like
Yeah.
these people are unlike anyone else. And embracing that uniqueness, I think, is really important for founders.
Yeah, I love that. Like, the sense of uniqueness is, like, a really interesting one. I feel like it's really interesting when you find a business that's and you meet the person and you're just like, they're so specifically, like, intertwined, and you can feel, like, the elements of them imbued throughout their business, which is, like, really special. So I wanna go back a bit in time because I some of the listeners that we have are
Mhm.
aspiring angel investors, and you were joking before, but your side gig is merging with your main gig in that respect. But I'd love to hear like what was what was your like next hour after you made the decision for, one of those first angel investments that you made? What did that like feel like for you? Or what was that process?
When I first started angel investing, I was very focused. Like my reason to even begin angel investing was I wanted to support female founders. I just felt very strongly, and I still feel this way to some extent, that there was amazing talent,
Mhm.
women operators, builders, engineers that were getting overlooked by the industry. So that was sort of my mission is like I wanted to find amazing women building, big ideas, big companies and back them on their journey very, very early, that first kind of check phase and believe before other people believe. That was
Mhm.
that was my goal. And I think that like my first two checks, one was into a fund focused on female founders. I
Mhm.
was one of the first people to be like, yes, you should go do this. I can write you a check. It's going to be very small, but I'm going to help you in a lot of other ways. But you should definitely build a fund focused on female founders. Amazing idea. And the other was, I think this might have been Alpha, which was a community
Oh,
IC
yeah, yeah.
company.
I like
And yeah,
I
I
did,
see,
I
you're good
participated
at it.
on Alpha. I was, like, at 2VC Capital, and I think they were, like, just launching in beta in, like, 2019, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, this is so cool." It's like an anonymous social media where you can, like, post about your experience being a woman in tech, and, like, it was
It
awesome.
was
I
like
was
a
like, "Oh my
Reddit for
gosh."
women in tech and designed to be
Yeah.
this very empowering community for professional connections, et cetera. And so it was like a win-win-win. Like, yes, it's like a female founder building for women. And so, I think the moment after you write those angel checks, it's both exhilarating, like, wow, I'm finally doing it, and totally terrifying. You're like, oh man, I just you're putting
Mm,
capital on the line. You have no idea how it's going to work out. And I think a lot of angel investors, like at first couple checks, you sweat it a lot. You sweat it a lot because you're new to it, and you should. And it's a learning journey and a learning process. But you're honing your own, I think, process and philosophy around like how do you diligence companies as an angel? And then like what ultimately makes you say yes to backing
mhm,
someone? Because it does come down to your belief in that individual and what gives you that internal conviction that this is someone really special or this idea is very special. So I think angel investing, there are many different ways to do it. I
mhm.
don't think you have to do it at all. I don't know why we like lionize and mythologize angel investing as much as we do, but it's great for the ecosystem. So people have to keep doing it. But I
Yeah.
think there's lots of different reasons to do it. And it's important to be honest with yourself why you're doing it. Some people do it because they want to really help certain communities. Some people do it for financial returns, right? And some
Mhm.
people do it because they want to provide access to underrepresented individuals in venture. Other people
Mhm.
do it to learn and to stay close to the startup world and to innovation, right? And you can do it at all kinds of check sizes. And so, I'm anyone out there who's interested in angel investing, I'm happy to give you kind of like my lessons and advice. But I think it's a great way to learn. And it's a great way to see for yourself if investing is something that you might be interested in down the road.
Yeah, and very clearly investing was something that you were interested in down the road. So I would love to hear more about like what your journey was like joining NEA. I guess like Luke Pappas
Mm.
is the one that introduced us and he's
Yeah.
just said so many fabulous things about NEA and he talked a lot about his journey in joining, but I would love to hear more what that was like for you.
Yeah. Well, and I love working with Luke. So,
Shout out Luke. I'm
yeah,
gonna
shout
send
out
this to
to
him.
Luke. He's a great part of NEA. I mean, look, for me, once after Rival, I was at a career decision point where I, really wanted to try venture. And the question I think for anyone who's interested in trying venture is sort of how do you want to practice venture, right? There are many different ways to do it. And I think part of my journey in joining NEA was one, I wanted to be part of an organization with really kind, smart, collaborative people who had a lot of experience in venture, who would be great sort of mentors that, I could learn the craft from. And where my operating expertise and my experience at Uber, Twitter, and other startups would be really valued, right? Because it would add something to the firm and add something to the organization. So finding that overall fit is really important. And I saw that in NEA. NEA is known for being very founder friendly, which is important to me. It was like one of the first things on my list. High integrity and really, I think humble in sort of always putting companies and founders first, as opposed to like chest pounding about like, look at how great we are as a firm. Like we truly put founders and companies first in the way that we interact with the world and we stand behind them. But I think part of it too was that I wanted to be in a position where I could lead investments, be a lead
Mhm.
investor, and really sit on the boards of the companies that I invested in, because that is sort of the highest level of commitment that you can make to a company. Taking that board seat, being the lead check, that means you are long term committed to working with that founder, working with that company, and really taking them from initial check to hopefully exit or IPO. And it's really interesting and challenging work. But I think, NEA is a multi-stage firm. We do everything seed to series B. We have a growth fund. And so it was a place where I felt like I could really, work with a lot of different, founders and companies and find those, really special relationships to cultivate for a long period of time.
I love well, yeah, super cool to hear more about your experience there and digging like a bit deeper. So,
Mhm.
we're talking about this a bit before, but at Twitter, you had a dual role in terms of working on Twitter commerce and then the team that led partnerships. So, I wanted to get a bit into the weeds of kind of your thoughts on the future of Twitter as we see different product changes from like review shutting down, which is Twitter's
Yeah.
newsletter service, to rumors about having more longer form content on Twitter. I think like that Twitter had like an incredible amount of like tech debt that it worked through in the past couple of years. So it's been really interesting to see the company pushing out different innovations in commerce. I'm sure these were things that you were thinking about when they were there. And yeah, I would just love to hear like some of your thoughts on the future of the platform. It's one that's dear to my heart based on kind of like it's like
Well,
how I ended up running a venture fund. So yeah, I would love to hear more about it.
so that, I mean, I think that's the most interesting thing about Twitter is that we're all constantly in our own way, kind of co-creating the product together, right? And what we experience on the platform. And obviously, I think, within the tech community, Twitter is still a product that does a lot of good, right? In terms of making
Yeah,
connections and
definitely.
bringing people together and knowledge sharing. I left Twitter many years ago, but I will say that, and of course, it's a topic du jour, so it's fun to pontificate on it. I'm under no illusions that I can predict where Twitter is going at this point or what will even happen tomorrow, right, with the
Yeah.
product. That feels like an impossible task. But what I will say is that, I think something that's been true about Twitter for many years now is it is this amazing platform, but one that has, stagnated in many ways in terms of really keeping up with the times of the way that we consume content. TikTok, right, came along and did short form video, right, and got us all addicted to this amazing, really positive, fun, entertaining experience on there every day. You had Snap come along and really, disrupt sort of conversation and chats with friends and creative self expression. And so, time and time and again, I think Twitter has let these kind of trends and opportunities go by and hasn't really innovated, in terms of introducing new product experiences, right? And Twitter Spaces, just as a reminder, only came about because of Clubhouse. And so, I think that the reality is there's a lot of low hanging fruit for the product, right? And where it could go with the right kind of leadership and the right kind of product and engineering leadership at the top. And so, you could introduce live streaming, you could introduce video, you could, enable more creator monetization on the platform. You could certainly, give another shot at commerce, right? Which Instagram ended up doing very, very well and Twitter never fully committed to, right? As a company. And so it didn't see the benefit of sort of mobile commerce and creator commerce within its own platform. But none of that really matters if you don't maintain engagement and if you don't maintain trust. And that's where, Twitter is falling on its face right now, like day in and day out, is losing trust with its users and its advertising base. And if you lose trust, that is something that is very, very hard for any consumer product to come back from. It is very rare that if you have a fundamental loss of trust in a platform, that you can still maintain engagement over time. And so, I think we're still kind of in a downward cycle with Twitter where it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I think if Elon and whoever he brings into the company to lead it from here can maintain and encourage engagement, content creation, participation, and actually increase that engagement over time, then it's kind of the world's your oyster for new products that you can introduce because now you're a private company. You're not subject to quarterly earnings calls. You have a lot of room to run in theory for trying and testing, new features.
Okay, I have one question for you as we wrap up. And this is more for the founders in the room. How do you think about evaluating companies that you're interested in investing in? Yeah. What are kind of like I would say your 3 main decision frameworks?
So I would say, broadly speaking, whether it's consumer or SaaS, right? Consumer SaaS, fintech marketplaces, right? I think this is true across any of those categories. I'm looking for a truly differentiated product, a product that has kind of a moment of magic in it that really feels fundamentally better or brings fundamentally more utility to the user than what they've experienced before. There's a lot of incremental innovation that we see from startups. And, but I think it's rare to kind of start from something incremental and build your way into something that feels very disruptive. And so what I'm looking for is products where it is 10x better, where it's a magical experience that we just have not seen before. Because that, if we look back to like that first time you used the Uber app and you pressed the button and you got a ride, it was like mind blowing, right? And then we didn't want to go back to the old normal. And so that is where the bar is and should be most of the time for new products. So I look for that, or at least a vision for how to build that, right? In a particular category. Then I really look for just business fundamentals, right? How are you acquiring your users? How efficient is your go-to-market strategy? Do you have some powerful forces at play that can really accelerate the company, whether it's built-in virality or network effect? And are you kind of designing virality into the way that you're building the product? Or for SaaS, that could be bottoms up adoption, for example. And the third thing is really around the founder, because the founder matters almost more than anything else. Is their founder opportunity fit?
Yeah.
Does the founder have an incredible command of how they're going to build the company over time? Are they thinking about how do I build a category leading company or a category creating company? What's my wedge? How do I win? Like, can they play the chess game that is required on the field in order to really, truly win a segment or a category and therefore create some enduring, value out there? Because the reality is, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all about execution. And almost every startup has a copycat. So it does come down to the founder's ability to lead and navigate and attract amazing people to the cause. And when all those three things are there, I get very, very excited. But I don't predict the future. Like, I don't think VCs, and I would say this for myself in particular, I'm not sitting here being like, here's a company that needs to be built, or here's the perfect trend. And like, if only someone were building against that, like that's not for us to decide. I think founders come up with the ideas, founders see the trends, founders see the future. We just have to make sure that, there's a viable business there and that we are the best investors, to support that particular company.
Awesome. Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us today. I so enjoyed our conversation. And then where should people follow you / find you on the internet if they want to follow you?
Oh, yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter at Anne Bordetsky. Very easy to find. You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. You can at Anne Bordetsky find me on Medium. Pretty much any platform, it's at Anne Bordetsky. It's very easy. You'll find me. I'm there. And thanks for having me on, Paige.
Yeah, of course. Special thank you to producer Riley Jennings and podcast editor Tate Doherty for your help on this episode. If you're listening and you'd like to connect with me, follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, Paige Finn with 3 N's. Thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it. You can look out for new episodes every Monday at 5 p.m. PST. And if you'd like to learn more about the strategies and tactics of seasoned institutional investors and rising venture stars, check out our YouTube channel at Seed to Harvest. Also, my TikTok channel is Seed to Harvest, where I post a lot of behind the scenes. And if you like this episode, please rate and review this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, if that's on Apple or Spotify. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.